But, for example, how a fair trial is to be assured, or whether pornography or tobacco advertising is to be excluded from freedom of expression, will and can legitimately be given a different answer from one European country to another and from one government to another in the same country. Universality, even within a like-minded community of states, as in Europe, cannot therefore require uniformity across the whole range of activity covered by human rights. There is a spectrum of choices available to the national democratic institutions, that's freely elected parliaments, governments, the independent courts, for fulfilling their country's international engagements under the European Convention. What I called earlier the second layer of human rights protection has as its purpose to protect people, especially vulnerable minorities or individuals, from the excesses of majoritarian rule. A violation of universal rights in relation to conduct coming within this second layer of protection can only be said to occur if the national democratic authorities stray outside the range of options judged to be permissible in modern European democratic society. Consequently, a line needs to be traced between what is properly a matter for each community to decide at local level and, on the other hand, what is so fundamental that it entails the same international requirement for all European countries, whatever the variations in tradition and culture. Well, this the European Court has endeavoured to do through a principle of interpretation of the European Convention called the doctrine of the margin of appreciation. The national authorities enjoy a margin of appreciation, that is, a discretionary power to regulate and thus possibly to restrict the exercise of certain rights, not the right to physical integrity, torture, for example. And the country can only be condemned internationally if that margin has been exceeded. Now, quite apart from the consequences of particular Strasbourg judgments for the particular defendant governments concerned, the participation of sovereign European states in an international legal community generating through an independent international court a common law of human rights based on shared principles and values is a beneficial, practical expression of universality. That common law from Strasbourg, although not being formally binding on national courts and not imposing uniformity in all the countries, provides guidance as to how the European Convention's abstract formulations are to be interpreted and applied in given kinds of situations. It radiates a unifying influence throughout the internal legal orders of the participating European states and thereby reinforces the universal character of the rights in a more concrete manner than mere declaratory instruments can. There is, however, a growing choir of dissident voices, notably in French legal writing, who feel that the Strasbourg Court is not itself properly respecting the margin of appreciation and is interfering too much in the ordinary details of democratic life in the participating countries. The critics assert that the considered decisions of national parliaments, governments and supreme courts are being overruled in Strasbourg, not because of any truly universal imperative objectively determined, but rather because what they call the literally irresponsible Strasbourg judges feel that they personally know better on the issue of social policy at stake. There is talk of the Strasbourg court becoming tyrannical and of the absolutism of human rights. Through what is called evolutive interpretation, the Strasbourg court is said to be reading into the 1950 text of the European Convention not just new 21st century connotations of the enunciated rights so as to take account of the evolving modern world, but wholly new rights outside the scope of the text, new rights whose fundamental character is more than questionable. Critics speak of the Strasbourg court busily manufacturing an artificial inflation of human rights, pseudo-human rights, and of thereby trivializing the concept of human rights, and in the process devaluing the genuinely fundamental universal rights which deserve the label human right. Well, this is not the place to go into the rights and wrongs of such criticism. I have cited them merely to illustrate the inevitable tensions produced by having cohabitate together within the walls of universality of human rights, on the one hand international enforcement, and on the other hand national implementation by a democratic society. Well, this brings me to the conclusions to be drawn from the experience of the Strasbourg machinery over the last 50 years. Well, the European Convention, firstly, can be seen as embodying a community of like-minded states with a common ethos in human rights, a regional ethos which differs in some respect from that of other continents and other regions in the world, notably in its explicitly making the existence of effective political democracy and respect for the rule of law necessary concomitants of the proper observance